Father Henry was going to do a church wedding immediately following the service in the sanctuary, hoping that a number of the members of the congregation would stay for the wedding. And as he pronounced the benediction, he drew a complete blank, and he couldn't remember the name of the couple that he was supposed to marry. So he said, in lieu of that, will all those who desire to get married please come forward? 6 widows, 7 single women, a couple of single men all came forward at the same time. Carol said it earlier. We're looking at parables, and parables are earthly stories with heavenly meanings. And Jesus is using things from everyday life that people experience all the time. In the small villages in Israel, there are weddings that take place on a regular basis. And so he uses that image, one that they know very well, in order to teach. Now, Jesus has been delayed 2,000 years, and many in the church are asleep. In the Old Testament, many thought that Jesus was a long time in coming as the consolation of Israel. And yet the author to the letter of Hebrews said that he came in the fullness of time. And he will come again in the fullness of time. Problem is, we don't know when that is. He said only the Father knows. You may remember a few years ago there was a guy by the name of Harold Camping. He was an engineer by trade, and he studied the Scriptures, and he came up with the solution of when Jesus was going to come, and he published it, and he told his followers, don't go to church, you don't need to do that anymore, the church age is over, quit your jobs, you don't need to work. And the day came, and the day went. Oops. And so he recalculated, like my GPS, I love her, recalculating. So he recalculated, and he did it again, and Jesus didn't come again. And he did it 4 times, and then finally he said, you know what? Can't be done. We don't know when Jesus is going to come back. We have the promise. We affirmed it in our affirmation of faith this morning in the Apostles' Creed. We said that he will come again in glory. That's what we know. But we don't know when. We don't know the day. We don't know the hour. And so Jesus, in Matthew chapter 24, it's called the Little Apocalypse. He gives us signs about the times at the end. But he doesn't give us a day, and he doesn't give us an hour. And then he tells some parables. And at the end of Matthew 24, there is a servant who believes that his master is a long way off and he won't return anytime soon. And so he's partying hard at his master's house and eating up all of his stuff and drinking all of his wine and having a good time. And the master shows up when he least expects it. Now, in our parable this morning, the parable of the 10 virgins, beginning at Matthew chapter 25, verse 1, page 830, if you want to follow along in your pew Bibles, the first parable is about this delayed expectation about Jesus. And when our expectation about Jesus' return is delayed, we become secular. We stop worrying about spiritual things and we start focusing on earthly things to the exclusion of spiritual things. That was the lesson of the parable before this one. Now this one, the lesson is the opposite. When we expect an imminent return, when we expect that Jesus is just around the corner, Jesus says there are 2 dangers. And so he spells it out for us. There's wisdom and there's foolishness. One danger, or not a danger, one opportunity is that we become wise and that we prepare for his coming. The other is a danger that because we think he's coming soon, we don't have to take time to prepare ourselves. We don't have to work the way that he wants us to work in the ministries that he's given us in this world because, well, after all, he's just outside the door and he'll be here any minute. So Jesus starts off with that word tote again. He's changing from the previous parable. Now he's telling a new story. The kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. It's in the future tense. It's as if we're already in the kingdom of heaven, and we're looking back on those days when we made serious commitments, when we made big decisions in our lives. The kingdom of heaven will be like when we did these things before, some time ago. 5 of them, of the 10 virgins. Now, 10 virgins is Jesus' language. Our language is bridesmaids. 10 young ladies that are dressed in the ugly dress with the matching shoes, and they've paid the money, and they've had the party, and they're all there, and they're ready to go. In Jesus' day, no dress, no shoes, but they've got a lamp, and so they're there, they're prepared. They've been invited by the bridegroom to provide a certain service. So they are to light the way of the procession of the wedding as it progresses. Now we need to understand something about a wedding in the ancient world. There are three parts to it. The first part is that the father of the bride and the father of the groom sit down and they negotiate a dowry. And then to make sure that the money is there, or the chickens, or the goats, or the cows, or whatever the dowry was there, they live apart for a year. They are betrothed. Now we met that term in Matthew chapter 1. Joseph was betrothed to Mary. Mary still lived at home with her parents. Joseph still lived at the carpenter shop. And they're going to make sure that this is all going to work out fine before there is the actual wedding. The next step is that the groom goes with his groomsmen, with his friends, to the bride's house to claim his bride. And this is where our story picks up. And so he's claiming his bride, and then he takes her in a procession across the village to his home, where there will be a big wedding feast and where the wedding will actually take place. So the day in the ancient world of the wedding was known because people are delivering wine and food to the groom's house. But again, the hour is unknown. He could come at noon. He could come at 3 in the afternoon. It's totally up to him when he should arrive at the bride's home to take his bride and bring her to his house for the party. And so that's where we are. Now, we've got some background on this in the wisdom literature of Israel. In the book of Proverbs, wisdom is personified. Her name is Sophia, and she is a woman who stands by the side of the road calling out about a lifestyle to the men who pass by. And there's another woman, and her name is Folly, or foolishness, and she calls out to the men as they pass by about the lifestyle that she offers. And so the men who pass by are called upon to make a decision. Will they follow wisdom, or will they be foolish? Will they be sensible, or will they be silly? And so those are the choices that Jesus is offering us in this parable. He wants us to understand that he's calling us, the listeners to this parable, to a decision. Will we heed his warning? Will we be wise, or will we be foolish? Now, on the basis of profession, on the basis of looking at these bridesmaids, they all look the same. They've shown up on the appointed day. They've brought their lamps with them. They're prepared to do what is required of them on the day of the wedding. If they were asked, "Are you in the bridal party?" they would say yes. In other words, "Are you a Christian?" Yes. "Are you prepared to fulfill the service?" And they all say yes. But Jesus says, in the church, there are two kinds of Christians. There's two kinds of disciples. There are wise disciples who are prepared and who bring oil, and there are foolish disciples who are totally unprepared and don't bring what is necessary. In my preparation for preaching a sermon, I read lots of commentaries. Commentaries are hilarious sometimes. The oil represents the Holy Spirit. The oil represents holiness. And I don't think it's either of those things. In the context of this passage, particularly following the great commandment, "You shall love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength," with the promise of Jesus coming and the expectation that we are to be about his business, I believe the oil is our lives lived, as it says in Romans 12, 1 and 2, "I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present yourselves a holy and living sacrifice unto God, which is your spiritual service of worship." I believe that it is our careful and creative service of both God and our neighbor. Jesus has just gotten done telling them the most important thing is the great commandment. Love God, love your neighbor. That is the oil, that is what we as followers of Jesus are supposed to be about as we await his coming. And so there's the oil. Verse 2, 5 of them were foolish, 5 were wise. Verse 3, for when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. There's this idea that you can be a Christian, but don't be fanatical. You can be a Christian, but don't be crazy. Don't live what you say you believe. Don't drag that stuff into the public square. Don't demonstrate by your life what it is that you say you believe. It's okay for you to have that so long as you keep it in your home, keep it in your church, but don't take it out there into the world. And Jesus is saying that that is foolish. On the other hand, he's saying that if we're creative in our service of God and of our neighbor, then we have come prepared and we are wise. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. And as the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. And to us it seems that the bridegroom is delayed, just like it was for ancient Israel. He'll come, but we don't know the day, we don't know the hour, but he will come, and he's given us signs and portents of when we can expect it in chapter 24, but we don't have the day or the hour. And so they became drowsy and they slept. I think it's noteworthy here that it's not blameworthy to sleep. The disciples who are prepared, the bridesmaids who are doing what God has called them to do, they can sleep with a good conscience. And it's night. In the ancient world, when it gets dark, there are no electric lights, there's no street lights. And when it gets dark, it gets dark. It's time to go to bed, and then they get up when the sun comes up. So it's okay that they all went to sleep. We're not supposed to lie in bed at night wondering if Jesus is coming with our knees knocking and shaking in fear that he may come tomorrow morning. It's okay to have a good night's sleep if we're living lives that are pleasing to him and bearing fruit as he calls us to do that. Verse 6, but at midnight there was a cry. At midnight. Now, the day was set when the wedding was going to take place, but not the hour. This guy waits till 11:59 p.m. to go and claim his wife. Everybody has gone to sleep. I wonder what the bride was thinking. This is what we think. Where is he? Is he coming? Is he going to show up? Is he going to stand me up at the altar? Where's Jesus? And he's promised to come again, and things are getting worse and worse and worse, and he isn't here yet. And the bride is thinking, where's my husband? He promised that this is our wedding day, and it's gone. Where is he? He shows up at midnight. Now, this is why he told the bridesmaids to bring their lamps. Well, they knew it would be in the evening at least. It would get dusk, and they would have their lamps, and then they were to light a parade. All the people would come out of their homes, and they would go to the groom's house for this big wedding party, and so they've got their lamps. But they've been checking their lamps and making sure that their lamps work, and now 5 of those lamps are sputtering, and 5 of those lamps, the flame has gone down, and they don't throw a whole lot of light. Verse 8. Then all of those virgins, 7, all of those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps, verse 8. And the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. Okay, we live in a time of grace. We live in a time when God offers us mercy. We live in a time when Jesus says that if we are to seek, we shall find. If we ask, it will be given to us. If we knock, the door will be open to us. But when the bridegroom comes, when the day of judgment arrives, that grace and that mercy are gone forever. These are parables of judgment. And when we only speak about the grace and the mercy and the love of God at the exclusion of his judgment, we disfigure the gospel. Jesus is here giving us parables of judgment about what to expect if we are not ready, if we are not prepared when he comes, when he arrives. And the foolish said to the wise, give us some of your oil. And this is always the way of humanity. Those who work hard and those who prepare and those who have are always put upon by those who haven't prepared and who have procrastinated and have put things off and held things at arm's length. And now they want help. But when the day of judgment comes, this is the first lesson of the parable, we can't count on help from the church. We can't count on help from others. Oh, but Lord, my mother was such a godly woman. You got to let me come in on her skirts, you know. Oh, Lord, my wife, she's such a godly woman. Oh, Lord, my grandmother, you should have known her. She was unbelievable. And people think that they can kind of slide in on the grace that belongs to others. And the parable is teaching us that we're on our own. It is frighteningly individual when Jesus shows up. That's the first lesson. Give us some of your oil. But the wise answered, saying, since there will not be enough for us and for you, rather go to Walmart and get some for yourself. Now, they weren't catty, they weren't snappy with them, they didn't call them names or tell them how foolish they were, they didn't rub their noses in it, they told them where they got their oil, now you go get your oil. but they're not providing their oil because they, unlike the foolish bridesmaids, are thinking about the bridegroom. He has given them a task. He's given them a job. Should the bridegroom show up and have 10 faltering, flickering lamps to light the procession? Or should he have at least 5 who thought of in advance what was required of them, what their job entailed, came prepared, and to light the procession of all of the villagers all the way across town to the groom's home? They're thinking of the bridegroom. They're thinking of what they promised that they would do for the bridegroom. Verse 10, and while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. That's a Semitic idiom. Rabbis used it. The door was shut. It's a way of saying that the opportunity has been lost. There was a time when you could seek and ask and knock, and it would be made available to you, but the door now is shut. That time is over with. Now you are on your own. Verse 11, and afterward the other virgins came also saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. Now, New Testament scholars use this word, it's recapitulation. Matthew takes images that he's used before and then he reuses them again. Carol did a great job of it this morning in the children's time. This little light of mine, well, that's the Sermon on the Mount, that's Matthew, I think it's 5:16. But let your light so shine before the world that they glorify your Father in heaven. And so the job of a bridesmaid is to light the way, to be the light for the bridegroom. And so they use that image over again. Well, here's another one. If you'll turn with me back to Matthew chapter 7, beginning at verse 21. This is an image that Matthew recapitulates or uses over again. These are Christians who say, Lord, Lord. Not everyone who says to me, says Jesus, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Now, what did Jesus say the will of his Father was? The great commandment. Love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. This we know to be the most important commandment. This we know to be the will of God. This is what Jesus has just gotten done telling them was the will of God. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. I never knew you. I mean, these are people who are doing ministry. These are people who are preaching Christ-centered sermons. These are people who are doing miracles and casting out demons and have a deliverance ministry. And we would think that that is the most important thing that we could do as followers of Jesus, is to be active. No. Love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. This is what we are to be doing as we await our Master's coming. These are Lord, Lord Christians. Outwardly, they look the same as the other 5 bridesmaids. But the other 5 bridesmaids were prepared. The other 5 bridesmaids were creatively serving their Lord, and now they're in the party. The party has started. The door is barred. Now it's too late. The opportunity has been missed. But he answered, truly I say to you, I do not know you. This is another Hebrew idiom and another term that's used by the rabbis. When they would dismiss a disciple who wouldn't do the memory work, the disciple who wouldn't study the Talmud, the disciples who wouldn't participate with the other disciples in the learning under a particular rabbi, they would be dismissed. They would be let go. And he would say, I don't know you. In other words, I will have nothing more to do with you. We see that Paul used this in the first missionary journey. You'll remember that John Mark traveled with Paul and Barnabas, and he got homesick, and about halfway through the ministry trip, he bailed and he went home. And so when it came time to do the second trip, Paul says, no, I don't know him. He bailed on us. He didn't follow through. He didn't do what he needed to do. And so they had this disagreement between Paul and Barnabas. Now, God was involved in that, and we ended up with 2 missionary teams going to other places and twice the ministry. But it's the principle that we see, I don't know you. He's closed the door. It's a missed opportunity, and now he says, I don't know you. And Jesus closes with these words, or this sentence: "Watch, therefore," or "be ready, for you do not know the day or the hour." He's offering us a choice, wisdom or folly. He's offering us to make a decision about what kind of disciple we will be and whether we will be found faithful when the Lord arrives. Or whether we think, oh, it's never going to happen, so we just live our lives for the moment and we use up the stuff that He has given us as stewards because it's His stuff, but He's not going to come around and I don't need to worry about it, so I'm going to use it all up. Or are we going to be wise bridesmaids? Are we going to creatively serve the bridegroom? This is the choice that He lays before us. And so the question that Carol asked the children, are you going to be wise or are you going to be foolish? That's the question that the Lord puts before us as well.